Around 1180 BC, in the capital of one of the most powerful empires on earth, a royal scribe pressed his stylus into wet clay for the last time. He didn't know it was the last time. His king ruled an empire that had stood for 400 years. An empire that fought Egypt to a standstill. An empire whose armies made pharaohs nervous. Within a generation, it was gone. The capital, empty. The language, silent. The name erased so completely that for the next 3,000 years, almost no one on earth knew the Hittites had ever existed. No conquering army took credit. No chronicle recorded the fall. So what actually happened? Let's be clear about what disappeared, because this wasn't some minor kingdom. At their height in the 13th century BC, the Hittites controlled most of Anatolia, modern-day Turkey, and reached deep into Syria. Their capital, Hattusa, Hattusa, was a fortress city of temples, arcs, and walls. They met Ramesses IV BC, Egypt's greatest warrior, pharaoh, at the Battle, the largest chariot battle in recorded history. Ramesses went home and carved victory monuments on every temple wall he could find. The treaty tells a different story. The world's first surviving peace treaty, a copy of which now hangs in the United Nations, shows two superpowers agreeing they could not destroy each other. That was the Hittite Empire, a superpower, an equal of Egypt. And here is the problem that has haunted historians for a century. Less than 100 years after Kadesh, this superpower ceased to exist. Not declined, not shrank, ceased to exist. Egypt survived its crises. Assyria survived. But the Hittites vanished so thoroughly that when their capital was rediscovered in the early 20th century, scholars had to decode their language from scratch, a language no human had read in 3 millennia. Empires don't just evaporate. Rome took centuries to fall. And even then it left Byzantium, left languages, left law. The Hittites left silence. So the question isn't just what destroyed them. The question is, what kind of catastrophe erases a superpower and then erases the memory of it? For decades, the textbook answer was simple. The Sea Peoples did it. Mysterious raiders from the Mediterranean who burned their way across the Bronze Age world around 1200 BC. It's a clean story. It's also, almost certainly, wrong, or at least dangerously incomplete. Because in the last 20 years, 3 lines of evidence have quietly rewritten this story. Archaeology from the ruins of Hattusa itself, climate data pulled from the rings of ancient trees, and desperate letters, actual letters, written in the final days of the Bronze Age world. Put them together and a very different picture emerges. Not a single killing blow, but a slow strangulation that ended in a decision no one expected. Here are the 3 discoveries that changed everything. Insight number 1. Popular of the archaeologists yet in Ziol 3 Thead Inventories. Flown of the 19th century thousand, he noticed something that didn't fit. Think about what a sacked city looks like to an archaeologist. Valuables abandoned in panic, bodies in the streets. The frozen chaos of a violent end, but made by men. The royal archives, the most important vestments, the temples, stripped the most valuable possessions, and left, in an organized way, before the fires. The burning came later, likely Kaska people from the northern mountains, torching as a ghost. Let that sink in. Capital of a superpower wasn't overrun. Its own government looked at the situation, decided that appeals already waited. The king, Supiluluma II, decided the city could no longer be held or fen. We don't know where he died. An empire that chose to walk out of its own capital. Why would anyone do that? Insight number 2. We can now read the weather of 1200 BC, year by year. In 2023, a team of researchers published a study in the journal Nature that did something remarkable. They analyzed the growth rings of ancient juniper trees from central Anatolia, trees that were alive when the Hittite Empire fell. Tree rings are a diary written by climate. Wide rings in good years, narrow rings in drought. And right around 1198 to 1196 BC, the exact window of the empire's collapse, the rings tell a brutal story: 3 consecutive years of severe drought, not one bad harvest. 3 back-to-back. For a modern country, 3 years of drought is a crisis. For a Bronze Age empire, it's a death sentence. Here's why. The Hittite heartland was always marginal farmland, a high, dry plateau where harvests were never guaranteed. The empire survived through a massive state system of grain storage and redistribution, huge silos at Hattusa, grain shipped from vassal states. It was, in a very real sense, an empire held together by bread. And we know the system was already failing before the drought hit its peak. Egyptian records from the pharaoh Merneptah, decades earlier, mention sending grain shipments to keep alive the land of Hatti, a superpower, importing emergency food from its greatest rival. That is not strength, that is an empire on life support. Now add 3 years of total crop failure. The silos empty. The vassals, starving themselves, stop sending tribute. The army can't be fed, so it can't enforce anything. The northern tribes push in. Every problem the empire ever had arrives at once, and the tool it used to solve problems, grain, is gone. This is what historians call a systems collapse. No single enemy, the machine itself, stops. And the Hittites weren't alone. This is the late Bronze Age collapse. Within roughly 50 years, Mycenaean Greece fell, Ugarit burned, dozens of cities across the eastern Mediterranean died. The Hittites were simply the biggest name on the casualty list. But there's one more twist. Because the story you were told, the empire vanished overnight, isn't quite true either. Insight number 3, the part almost nobody talks about. The Hittite state died around 1180 BC, but Hittite civilization didn't. In the southeast, in cities like Carchemish on the Euphrates, branches of the royal family survived. For the next 500 years, a constellation of smaller kingdoms we now call the Neo-Hittite states kept the culture alive. The language, the hieroglyphs, the gods, the art. The Assyrians kept calling that entire region the land of Hatti for centuries, and here's the detail that gives me chills. You've read about these survivors, probably without realizing it. The Hittites mentioned in the Hebrew Bible, Uriah the Hittite in the story of King David, those are almost certainly these Neo-Hittite peoples. For 3,000 years, that was the only memory of the Hittites the world retained, a few scattered verses. So the real ending is stranger than any invasion story. The empire starved, fractured, and evacuated. The remnants faded slowly into other cultures. And then, the truly remarkable part, the world forgot. Completely. No Greek historian wrote their story. No legend preserved their name. A superpower equal to Egypt was deleted from human memory. Until 1906, when excavations at a Turkish village called Bogaskoy uncovered thousands of clay tablets, and an entire lost superpower rose out of the ground. The Hittites didn't vanish overnight. They vanished from memory. And that, perhaps, is the more frightening kind of extinction. And now, the whisper. One detail from this story that almost no one knows. Among the last tablets ever written at Hattusa, scribes were still recording routine temple inventories and festival schedules. Ordinary paperwork. Which means that even as the world ended around them, the bureaucrats of Hattusa kept filing their reports. Right up until the day someone told them to pack the archives and go. Civilizations don't end with a scream. They end with unfinished paperwork. If this story did something to you, that feeling of standing over a 3,000-year-old silence, then you're exactly who this channel is for. Every week, I tell the stories history almost forgot, through the eyes of the people who were actually there. Subscribing takes 1 second, and it genuinely decides whether these stories keep getting made. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications so the next story finds you. And tell me in the comments, what do you think happened to the last king, Suppiluliuma II? Did he die defending a road out of Hattusa, or live out his days in exile, a king without a country? I read every theory. Who were the Sea Peoples? Where did they come from? And why has no one been able to answer that question in 100 years of trying? That's the next story. It's on your screen right now. Until then, remember, History doesn't repeat, it whispers.